What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. Today, I have my friend Jairo Osorno on the show. He is the founder of Carmen Hospitality, a short-term rental company out of Miami. He's been in the space for 10 years. He's got over 7,500 reviews on Airbnb, which is pretty amazing. And Jairo has is one of our first revenue management clients. So we're gonna share some results. We're gonna share some learning lessons, and of course, we're gonna share Jairo's story. So Jairo, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jasper. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, good to see you, man. It's funny because I was just staying in one of your units in Miami. My wife actually has a lot of family in Miami and Orlando, and we had a lot of birthdays to celebrate. So we were actually on that side of the country for 2 weeks, and I had the pleasure to actually stay with Jairo in one of his units, and we went for lunch, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, but it's man, I forgot how hot it is in Miami.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
so
especially
crazy.
this year. Yep. Yeah, it's hotter than ever. I think we're breaking some records this year, and it was nice to see you. It was nice to have lunch. We're still waiting for our 5-star review from you. I know it's coming.
Of course. Hey, I just checked out yesterday, like yeah, it's crazy how hot it is in Miami. It like really made me appreciate the climate here in Southern California. Every time I walked outside, it was like walking into like a hot, like some sort of
It's
like
like
a
a
wet
sauna. Yeah.
sauna or like a hot oven or something.
Yeah. I'm jealous, man. I'm jealous. It's exactly like that, but I'm used to it. Born and raised in Miami, so it's home.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, let's talk about Del Carmen Hospitality. I know you've been in the business for 10 years. Like how'd you get into it?
Yeah. So, I mean, historically, my mother and my grandmother in our family home where I was raised, they always kind of had a unit put aside where they were rent long term just for extra income to help pay for some expenses and some bills. And I guess that's, you know, the foundation for the idea. Because as they were doing that, I was still living at home, and the year was about 2014. I was young, maybe about 23 or 24 years old, still living with them, going to college. And I remember getting a college loan to buy books. And instead of buying books, I asked my mother and my grandmother, who owned the home, if I can subdivide another portion of the home and try this new thing I was hearing, which was Airbnb. I was hearing about it, didn't know much about it, but thought it'd be a cool way to earn some extra income. They allowed me to do that. So I used that money to build out that small unit and started hosting. And it went well. It went very well. So much so that it was earning more money than the long term units that they were doing. So as time progressed, the long term units also were converted into Airbnb units. And again, doing this from our home, and we saw an opportunity. And around that time, some of my friends were also getting into real estate. One of my closest friends, if not my best friend, purchased his first multifamily building. And he actually offered me the opportunity to master lease his building once he saw what we were doing with Airbnb at the house. And we took that step, master lease his building, 6 units. So it was arbitrage. And, the year must be maybe about 2015 now, and things were very, very good in Miami as far as competition. There wasn't much competition, not the competition that we're seeing today. Um, and things kind of just grew from there. Every opportunity that I would see that I can potentially do a master lease on a multifamily building, I would do. And actually, this friend who leased me the first building, he's a real estate agent. So uh, every time he'd be in the market and see an opportunity that might fit my portfolio, he'd present it to me. And he's pretty much been my exclusive um, broker since that time. And he just brings me buildings, and if they're a good fit, we onboard them and we put them into the portfolio. And during that time, also, we've been lucky enough to make some money and purchase some buildings. So right now it's 51 listings. Of the 51, we own nine of the listings we own, and the other ones are master lease through the arbitrage model.
Gotcha. And so we're in 2015. You see the opportunity. You're adding some additional buildings. What's changed since then? Because that's like
Um,
almost 10 years ago, right?
yeah,
Like, what's that
yeah.
journey been for you?
So it's what's. I guess the biggest change is the competition and the lease prices on master leasing buildings. I mean, I know rents have gone up across the board in the United States, but Miami in particular, I think, has seen some of the biggest increases in the nation. Um, I've seen our leases over between 2019 and 2023 triple.
Wow.
Yeah, and we don't see the same increases in our revenue, so the margins in that business start to become very squeezed. So as that starts to happen, you have to figure out how to run your business more and more efficiently, how to potentially bring in more revenue, and things of that nature. So it's really forced us to become a lot more lean, and really pay attention to the things that make a difference as far as bringing in revenue or cutting out expenses. So the biggest change is just that it's not as easy as it used to be. At the beginning, I remember just onboarding buildings, and you're making money. Not much thought have to go into it.
I know. When you're talking about tripling rent, my first thought that came to my head was like, man, you must have been like just crushing it. You
Yeah,
must have
yeah.
been making so much money.
But I wish that was the case forever. Eventually, things change, and you have to change with the market.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk more about like the revenue side and how we've been working together in the last couple of months. But before we dive into that, like tell us a little bit more about your model. So like when you master lease this building, multifamily, like 6, 8, 10 units, right? Um, what's your process? Like do you go in there and furnish all the units, and how long are the leases? Can you walk us through that process?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so really every building that we've been able to master lease, um, it's been really relationship driven. So my partner who brings me these buildings, he either already has a relationship with these people, or I, through my real estate network, have a relationship with these people. So there's already initial trust there, and knowing of who we are with each other. Very randomly, or maybe ever. I don't think we've ever had a random um, prospect for a master lease building. It's always been kind of somebody that you know or know of. So that relationship part has always been important as far as getting the foot in the door, and having those initial discussions. Um, so once we're able to negotiate a deal on what the per unit cost is going to be per month, considering that we take on a lot of the expenses like water, electricity, utilities, pest control, maintenance on the building, for the most part, anything under $500 we take on, um, and landscaping, things of that nature. All those expenses we take. Um, we model that in our models, and if we see that there's a potential to make some profit in this building, then we'll start discussing a lease and putting the terms into the lease that we can both be happy with. Typically, we're doing 3-year leases, with options to renew. Once that's negotiated upon and executed on, we negotiate some free time so that we can furnish and onboard these buildings, because as you know, that takes time. Um, the process that I've so I break down the onboarding in 2 phases. There's the infrastructure that you need to run this type of business, and then there's the furniture and decorations. Infrastructure for us over the years has developed. We've developed kind of like an infrastructure plan that we model and that we duplicate across buildings. Things like automated locks, camera systems, access points for internet. Those are things that we would consider infrastructure. We use a lot of gig economy services like Upwork. Uh, I'll find a designer. So there's one particular designer that I like working with. She's out of Serbia, and she'll have me take pictures and videos of the space, and we'll measure out the space, and we'll give her an idea for what we want to do with the space. For example, you stayed in one of our buildings in Little Havana, and we tried to model and decorate that space, and influence the decorations on Havana architecture and interior design. So we'll send her a lot of reference pieces that we find on Pinterest or on the internet, and say, look, this is kind of the angle that we want to take. And she'll actually develop computer models and renderings of spaces. And we'll work on those renderings together until we're happy with the look. And she'll take it a step further and actually provide links for the furniture. So now once we have this in hand, we can go to not really a contractor, but maybe your handy people, and say this is what we're trying to execute. So they'll paint in the same way, or they'll find baseboards, or or do all of the, I guess, finishes that you would need to achieve that look. And at the same time, we're purchasing the furniture and just consolidating everything in a public storage. And as things arrive, we'll bring them over to the building and have the handy people put them together and set them up.
How long does that process typically take?
From beginning to, I mean, so from having the plans approved and starting the purchasing, from that point to finishing, I'd say a good month and a half per building, month to month and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you negotiate that you're not paying rent during that time?
Yeah. So we do our best to get as much free rent at the beginning so that we have time to do these things, and they understand, and they know not only do we need to do this, but we need to take pictures and set up the listings and start marketing the space as well.
Right. Yeah. So you've been doing this for 10 years now, and the master leasing model was very popular, back in like 2015 all the way up to like a couple of years ago. Pretty much like COVID kind of gave that model a bit of a bad reputation because so many companies went out of business, right? Because people were stuck with leases, and now the demand was gone. So like looking back, like if somebody were to ask you right now, like, hey, would you recommend I start a similar type of business, and if so, what would be like your advice to that person?
I would recommend it, but you have to be very careful. Like with what you just said, I actually, was very lucky during COVID because South Florida was one of the few places that didn't close for very long and remained open for most of the time. And if it wasn't for that, I'd probably be in the same boat as these other guys were. Also, because of the relationships we have with the landlords, we were able to not pay rent for a couple of months or pay limited amounts of rent until things stabilized, and then we repaid everybody on the back end. So those relationships, I would say, if you're going to go into a master lease model, the relationship with the landlord is probably the most important thing. There should be trust between you guys. There should be some kind of relationship that pre-exists, just so that they know that you're working in good faith, and you can expect them to work in good faith. So if these type of things do occur, you can work through them. Try to running your numbers on the front end before signing any long-term lease. That's very important. Build models on Excel or on sheets, models that where you can see if you're going to be profitable or not, and where you can kind of factor in your increases over the next couple of years or few years, depending on the term of your lease, and just make sure that there's enough money there where you're not going to be in trouble after you sign out.
Because I remember when I got into Airbnb and you as well in 2014, I used to think that if you can't make like 2 or 3x versus the lease, and those opportunities were there. They were all over the place, right? So it's like if people would ask me like, hey, well, what kind of margin would you want to make if you do like an arbitrage? And I'd be like, 2, 3x. Right now I don't know if that's even possible anymore, right?
I mean, not for us. Not even close. We're happy if we get 15% net margins on a P&L model, right? So if 15% net profits, 20% net profits based off of revenues, that for us is a pretty successful master lease in today's market.
Right. Yeah. Which is, for you, I mean, you've been doing this for 10 years. Obviously, you've got a ton of experience. You've fine-tuned your business and everything, your operations. But for somebody new to get into this, with no experience, like trying to go for that like 15-20% margin, that must be, I don't know, that sounds like a pretty daunting thing to do.
It's tough, yeah, because you need some volume for that to make sense.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, let's talk about, now that we're talking about money and revenues and margins and stuff, let's talk about the revenue management side. So I think you came to us early January, right? To see if we could work together, right? Like what was the reason that you wanted to work with us on the revenue management?
So our relationship from a revenue management perspective started with the revenue management consulting at the beginning. And it was kind of just to explore what we can be doing better. That's how this started for us. And as we had those weekly calls and those meetings, we realized that there was a lot more to revenue management that meets the eye. And especially for us. Historically, it was kind of just like set it and forget it on price labs. And, we look at it whenever we could and didn't really know how to optimize. But as you were teaching us things, we realized that it takes a lot more time than you probably would think to optimize your revenue. And when we got to the end of that consulting period, we said, hey, we think it'll be a good idea if Jasper and his team actually took this on. And the numbers made sense. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all in this because it's a business. We love it, of course, but it is a business and it needs to make money, and the decisions that we make have to yield. And you helped us see that, based on how, or the extra income that we can expect, taking away your fee, we're still going to be making more money than we would have if we did this alone. And that's really that's the bottom line for us. It's working with you and doing it together is going to make us more money. Not to mention the relationship is good, and we know that we're in good hands because you guys are industry experts. You're not somebody building a course or trying to sell something that they don't actually do themselves. And that was another point of differentiation that was important to us.
And just to recap that, like, we started consulting with you in January, and we did that for 3 months, and then in April we took over the revenue management. But why did you come to us in the first place for the consulting side?
Well, because we saw a big change in the market. 2021, 2022 were very hot, easy to make money those years. 2023 not so much. And we saw that on the P&L. And continuing into 2024, we were expecting the same thing. So we really needed to change something. We knew we needed to change something if we wanted our numbers to be where they needed to be. And that's really the catalyst for going into the consulting in the first place.
Yeah, because I remember on one of our first calls, we actually went through QuickBooks, right? And we looked at the P&L. And this is the thing with the master leasing model, right? It can be very, very profitable, but if the rents are going up and the market's slowing down, that profit can quickly disappear. Right. And then making an extra like 10, 20, 30%, that could mean the difference between making a healthy profit for yourself and for your business, or just breaking even and not making anything, versus the management model. Yeah, if your income, if your top line revenue that you generate for your clients, if that goes down 20%, your income goes down 20%. But for master leasing, or if you own your own units, that 20% decrease could just mean the difference between making no money or making good profit, right? Let's say if your top line is probably going to be around the 1.5 or so this year, right? Like, if your leases and all your expenses are like 1.2, then it's like, oh, we're making 300K. But now if revenue goes down 20%, now suddenly you make zero, right? It's such a leveraged game that you're playing in that model, right?
Exactly.
So, well, let's dive into kind of like what have the results been, but more importantly, like, how did we get to those results, right? Because there's a lot of learning lessons, I think, in the 5 months or so that we've been working together. So let me ask you that first, and I have a lot of things that I could share, obviously, on my side. But from what you've seen, like, what were some of the biggest like learning lessons or changes that we've made since we started working together?
And so it's not just purely numbers. So a lot of the things that we learned with you was, we actually reviewed our listings and realized that there was a lot more that we can be doing that we weren't doing that will help us generate more revenue. For example, our pictures weren't great. Our listing titles, our descriptions, we had no captions in our photos. The orders of our photos, things of that nature that can easily be tweaked, that can make a difference on the amount of revenue that you earn every month. So having that advice for us was invaluable, and we've been executing on that. So it's not very simple for us because we have 51 listings, 20 or 30 photos per listing, and so it's a lot of work. But it's something that we've noticed that when we made those changes, along with the work that you've been doing on your side, we're seeing increases in revenue.
Yeah. And a lot of people seem to think that revenue management is just setting a base price and price labs, right? And as you mentioned, there's a
That's what
lot
it was
more
for
that
us
goes.
for many years. Yeah, that's what we did for many, many years. Just set the base, set it, forget it, and good luck.
Yeah, and to your point, like that worked in 2016, 17, 18, and it might even work. It worked in 2021, depending on what market you were in, and 2022. But those days are now officially over. I think,
Yeah.
there might be a few places around the world where that's still the case, but yeah, I mean, revenue management is really not, it's not just the pricing, right? It's the entire business that supports the revenue management. There's only so much that you can do with looking at the data and like setting prices, changing prices, and changing your settings, your minimum night stays, and like the discounts and whatnot. But in the end of the day, like there's all the other departments play into it, right? So, and that's why our service, our RPM, we call it revenue and pricing management. If you're not familiar with our service, by the way, you can listen to the podcast that I did with Eric a couple of days ago for a detailed description of like what the service entails. But one of the important parts is that we meet every single week to obviously to review the results, but also to talk about all those other departments. Like what can we do operationally to support the revenue management side. One of the things that I'm really happy that you guys took action on was hiring a virtual assistant, right? Because I remember when we started, like there was a lot of things that you guys weren't doing, like responding to reviews, and like every time I logged into your Airbnb account, I saw those reservation requests, and I'm like, Jairo, you got to respond fast.
It's always very embarrassing getting on those calls on Wednesday and just knowing that Jasper's going to call us out on all these things that we're not doing. So yeah, that kind of caused us to move on that VA, and you were able to also support some or provide some support on job description advice that we use to generate our job descriptions and post that online and find the right person and get them going. And my mom thanks you very much because she was the one that was handling all of the guest communications. She no longer has to do that, so she's very happy.
Yeah, and one thing that's actually really cool about your business is that you're actually you're a family run business, right? You run it with your mom and your sister.
Yeah. So my mother's name is Maria del Carmen, and the business name is derived from that. So that's Del Carmen Hospitality. She's the operations boots on the ground. My sister's everything clerical and financial related. My mom has a cleaning staff that reports to her, and she also manages the handy people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a family business, and happy for that.
Yeah, I mean that's invaluable, right? It's like freeing up that time, and we'll go a little deeper into into the operations and like how that VA is supporting the revenue management through the operations. But let me share some results real quick, right? Um, so in our RevPAR, which if you're not unfamiliar with RevPAR, it stands for revenue per available room. It's really the best KPI or the best metric that we have in the industry to look at our results. And the reason is that RevPAR combines occupancy with ADR, but also the amount of time that a unit is available, right? So if we just look at revenue, that's not a good metric because what if the owner occupied the unit for like a week, or let's say it was closed for maintenance for like a week or so, and RevPAR really takes that into account by calculating the average amount of money that you made per day. So if the month has 30 days, then you just divide the total revenue by 30, and that's how you get to your RevPAR. So April and May, our RevPAR was up about 27% compared to last year. The market was, and we always adjust for markets when we evaluate, right? Because if we're taking over a portfolio and we're like, hey, we did 20% better at RevPAR, but then if the entire market is up 20%, then we really didn't do any better than last year, right? So we always adjust our numbers for how the market did. So RevPAR 30%, that's pretty. I'm pretty excited about that because I remember when we first started working together, I told you like, okay, I think we can, we could probably do like at least 10, 15, maybe 20, maybe 25. So just seeing that 30% RevPAR increase is pretty exciting. And then just to kind of give an idea of like the additional revenue that's being created, I just calculated it just for April and May that results in like almost 50,000 of additional revenue, which in your case, because you're master leasing and you're not doing management, that's actually money goes straight into your pocket, right?
Right.
And I calculated that's a 5.64 ROI actually on the fee that you're paying us. And I think one of the biggest reasons that we've been able to increase it so much has to do with the booking window. Because one of the things I noticed when we started working together is like your booking window was extremely short, right? It was like literally like last year, 2023, the booking window was 7.8 days, which is like just over a week, which is very short. And obviously Miami is it's a downtown, it's a city market, so the booking window is always going to be short, especially for the units that you have, right? You have they're all studios and one bedroom, so it's definitely typical to have that short booking window. But the challenge with such a short booking window is that you're always like booking at these last minute prices, right? And so I think one of the biggest ways that we've been able to achieve this result is by changing our pricing strategy and get more bookings further in advance through different things. We're using like the early bird promotion, Airbnb, but we're also using Airbnb custom promotions and a few other strategies to really drive bookings further out. And I just calculated that the booking window has increased from 7.8 to 16.06 for April, June. So like the booking window pretty much doubled, which means that we're booking a lot more units at higher prices further in advance than having to heavily discount last minute, right? Because we all know last minute, like if you're still scrambling for bookings a couple days in advance, like we're going to have to be very competitive on price to get those bookings at that point, right? So I think that's really like one of the biggest drivers, and for everybody out there who's listening, if you're in a situation too where you're just getting all these last minute bookings and you're struggling to get bookings further out, then I think that's a really important focus. Like when the times were good, everyone was putting those massive premiums, those future premiums, and that's difficult these days. It's better to offer like a small discount and get people to book further in advance these days, especially in the competitive markets. So I think that's a big that was one of the big changes. But let's talk about some specific improvements or changes that we made. Like let me ask you, like what on the pricing side, like what from your perspective, what were some of the biggest changes that we've made?
I mean, it's all these nuances. There's so many things that you guys are doing that we weren't even thinking about. Like you mentioned the early bird specials, and the way those are executed, they take a lot of work to actually do. But it's a combination of all those little things that, when stacked, make a difference to the revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the time like us to actually execute those things, that's why the service it's been so valuable.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that everybody has to really realize. I think if you want to maximize your revenue, you have to look at it every single day. Like I spend about an hour per day per portfolio to look at the pacing and look at all the occupancy for all the units, right? And literally looking at like what bookings are every single booking that comes in. You should, as a revenue manager, you should look at every single booking that comes in, because every single booking has some information, right? So it's really, really important to look at that every single day. And again, a couple of years ago, that wasn't necessarily, but in today's climate, like it's just, there's no other way around it. It's just something that somebody on the team, especially if you're a larger operator like yourself, somebody on the team has to have the full focus on revenue management, right? If you love doing it yourself, then it could be yourself, but there's got to be somebody who has a full focus on it. But I made some notes of just kind of like sharing some concrete changes that we made, right? So number one, I mentioned like the Airbnb customer promotions, right? A lot of hosts are not using these, and we can do a whole podcast on Airbnb custom promotions of how they work, how to apply them, because it's pretty tricky. But we won't go too much into detail because we'll be talking for like 2 hours. But if you're not leveraging Airbnb custom promotions, then and Airbnb is a big channel for you, then I highly recommend check out those custom promotions, because in this year, like, people are really looking for discounts. People want to get a deal, right? And so having that call out on the Airbnb listing where it says like book now and get 20% off, 25% off, having that strike through, having that extra line item on the price breakdown on Airbnb can really help your conversion on the Airbnb listing. And if you play it right, a lot of times you actually don't have to give a real discount, because Airbnb uses a historic price point to determine the price of your custom promotion, which is something that a lot of hosts are not aware of. So it could be the case that, let's say you want to charge like $200 for a Saturday night. It's possible that you go on Airbnb at like a 20 or 30% discount, and you'll still be at that $200 price point. So it's definitely a little bit of a tricky game that requires a lot of management, but it's very powerful if you apply it correctly. Number two is the early bird discount on Airbnb. It's very, very powerful because that really helps you extend that booking window. If you have an early bird discount, Airbnb is going to show your listings to more people when they're looking to book further out. Next is, one thing that I do is I think a lot of operators are pricing too flat, which means that in your market there's a lot of demand on the weekends, but there's not a lot of demand on the weekdays, right? And if we only get booked on the weekends, which is, I think, for June right now, it's like very slow in Miami, right? I was looking at your data from last year, and last year, like, you didn't have a lot of weekday bookings. Like, most of the bookings were on the weekends, and we only booked the weekends. That's a problem because then, like, our occupancy drops so low. Like, I think last year, June, for you, it was like 36 or so. And we're losing momentum. Like, Airbnb is kind of like an all or nothing game, right? We have to constantly be booked. We have to really like drive that occupancy at least like 60, preferably 70 to 80% in order to get that momentum going and being able to charge the higher prices on the weekends. So what we did was we actually added a premium to the weekend nights, and we lowered the weekdays a little bit so that we weren't as flat as the market, and therefore we were able to drive a lot of occupancy during the week. And lastly, what's really, really important, what I think a lot of hosts miss, is we have to look into the future. We have to know what's going to happen. Obviously, we can't predict the future, but there's so many tools in Price Labs and other pricing tools where you can see, how are bookings looking for the next week or for the next month compared to last year. Because if you recognize that there's weakness, and you can literally see this for every single day. If there's weakness, then you know that you're going to have to be competitive early on to get the bookings. But if you see that the market looks very strong, then you can keep the prices higher, right? So we always have to look at the pacing and look at how many bookings how much occupancy is on the books compared to last year on the same day, right? And what was the final occupancy? So those are kind of like, there's a lot more, and we could talk for 2 hours about this, but I think those are the most important things that people have to apply in order to to really maximize their revenue.
Right. And who's got the time? That's our that's how we saw it. It's there's a lot of nuance in doing that. So you need not to only have the expertise, but you need to have the time to be able to do all that. And that was a big driving factor.
You need to enjoy it.
Oh yeah, and if you enjoy it, even better, because the time, you won't feel the time.
Yeah, no, because that's the thing. Like, it's hard to do this stuff if you're not, if numbers and graphs is not your thing, then you're kind of like swimming against the stream, and it's
just noise.
It's tough. I happen to be like a massive nerd, and I love looking at numbers and graphs, and that's pretty much all I do these days, because we've got like 6-7 portfolios now. So like, pretty much my whole day, I'm just staring at Price Labs, and
you're happy as can be.
Yeah, I love it. But yeah, like it's tricky, right? Because if that's not your thing, and to spend like an hour or maybe like an hour and a half a day looking at these numbers, if that's not what you enjoy doing, then it's just really difficult to do something well if you're not having fun with it. Let's talk about some other departments, right? Because we mentioned how it's not just about the pricing, right? We really got to look at our operations, at our marketing, distribution. It all plays into that revenue maximizing strategy, right? So you mentioned the marketing side. This is something that I see a lot now in the portfolios that we manage. There's so many Airbnb listings. There's 7 million or 8 million or something now. In order to show up on the top few pages, like our listings really have to be dialed in, right? We have to fill out all the different sections, like the amenities, adding detail to the amenities, the captions, the descriptions, obviously the photos, but also our Airbnb profile. Everything needs to be complete. Like we can't miss any information. We really have to dial in our listings 100% because Airbnb doesn't like it when you don't have any captions, because Airbnb knows that those captions will help drive conversions, right? So we as a host, we have to play that game. We have to play Airbnb's game. Otherwise, we're not going to show up in the search results. So I've noticed that especially this year, like there's a lot of students in our revenue management course and our clients who have beautiful homes, but because the Airbnb listings are like 80% finished and not 100% finished, they're still struggling, right? So I think we've been working on your listings for a while now, right? We created a database because there's a lot that goes into it, right?
Yeah, we've been doing it since January, and we're still working on it. Currently, we're editing all of the pictures, and that's a daunting task. Luckily, we were able to find some good help online, and we've got a gentleman who's doing a great job, and he's about 10% in.
Yeah, no, it's the pictures, but then also it's other stuff that we worked on is, for example, the categories, right? This is something that I think not a lot of people know, but a lot of times, like the Airbnb categories are kind of random. I'm sure if you're listening to this, I'm sure this might sound familiar, but like some of our listings in Idlewild for FreeWild, we were in the desert category, but then we weren't in the cabins category. Where it's in Idlewild, it's mountains. There's no desert. But the reason that Airbnb thought that we were in the desert is because we're so close to Palm Springs. So the algorithm that they use, like it's just off, right? And like and that was the case for some of your listings too, right? Where it's like the categories just didn't
they
really
would
make
say
sense.
Beach when a certain listing wasn't even close to the beach. Or National Park, I think was what we were getting. We were getting National Park in some of them, and we don't have any parks close by.
Yeah, and I think it's something that most people don't notice, but there's a way to suggest to Airbnb what categories you want to be in. And there's also a way to suggest to Airbnb that they delete certain categories that are not accurate. Right? It's really important to show up in the right categories because people use those categories when they search on Airbnb. So if you have not gone through this process, then what I would recommend is go to elevate.translated.com/categories. Okay, this is a link that you can find on the Airbnb website as well if you search for it. So if you search Airbnb, if you Google Airbnb categories, you'll be able to find this link on that page. But it's elevate.translated.com/categories. If you type that into a URL, you can log in with your Airbnb in the login details, and then you'll be able to literally suggest to Airbnb what categories your listing should be in, and they will respond typically within 5 days or so. We got our listings for FreeWild. We got all of our listings in the cabins category, which is the most important for us, and we got one of our units in the design category, which is really nice because if you're in design, you can then add information on who designed your unit, and that will display on the Airbnb listing. So that's pretty neat. But then it's also like the Wi-Fi speed, for example, right? We can do like a real test, a little Wi-Fi speed test. That's going to show up in your listing too. And there's very few hosts who have done that. So there's just so many little details now where you can optimize these listings, and it's really, really important to do that, because if you don't, then you're really falling behind. And like you mentioned, it is a lot of work, and it's also Airbnb is constantly changing things, right? So we always have to stay updated on like what's the newest feature, and because Airbnb really gives you an advantage if you're on top of this stuff. And the reality is that most hosts just aren't, right? So we can stand out from the crowd by being constantly updated and just making sure everything is dialed in.
Right. Yeah, and it was a lot of work. I remember having to go to each one of the listings, and it's 51 of them, and do that Wi-Fi test.
I know, right? It probably took you the whole day.
A few days, I would say.
Let me see. I've made some other notes. So operations, right? Like when we started working together, like you mentioned, there was we when we get like an inquiry on Airbnb, like we have to respond fast, right? Because that's a lead, that's a sales lead essentially. Somebody is interested in our space, right? So every minute that we wait, we might lose that lead. So having somebody to be there to focus on that, as well as like writing the reviews and responding to the reviews, like that's a lot of work in itself, right? And you guys, when we started working together, you guys were pretty overwhelmed. I was shocked that you guys didn't have a VA with 51 listings.
Yeah, now having one, I'm shocked that we didn't either. Now knowing what's on the other side of having a VA,
I know it feels so good, huh? When you're just like you look and somebody else is doing the work for you.
Oh, yeah, we're absolutely going to go for a second one soon.
Yeah, it's amazing. And by the way, you hired a virtual assistant in because most people hire them in the Philippines, but you ended up hiring somebody in Colombia, right?
Right, Colombia, right?
How's that experience so far?
So far, very good. We're very happy with her. So there's not too big of a time difference between us and them. Also, a lot of our guests are Spanish speakers. They're coming from Latin American countries, so it's good to have somebody who speaks Spanish for us at least.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been a very good plus. But we've been happy, very happy. She's done a good job. She was somebody who had experience in our industry, so we hired well.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And can you share like how did you find your virtual assistant?
Sure. So the first thing was defining the job description. Really being very detailed on that document and creating a document for a job description. This allows you not only the opportunity to really know what you're looking for and to dial that in, but it also makes it clear of what you're expecting. We added something to ours where we have the person we hire sign the job description. So if there's ever any issues in the future, we can say, look, this is part of your job description. This is what you sign on your hire date. So once we had the job description done, I went on to Upwork and started to search people that I felt, or job titles that I felt will have complementary skill sets to that job description. And I would just go through them. And as I saw people that I thought were a good fit, I would ask them if they'd like to apply for this job. We ended up getting maybe 6 or 7 people that were interested in applying. Then we scheduled interviews with each one of them. Our long list turned into a short list of 2, and ended up selecting the one that we thought would be the best fit.
And that's did it take a long time to go? Because on Upwork there's thousands of profiles, right? Did it take you some time to to really make that selection?
No, not really. I would say from when we started inviting people to interview, about a week and a half, just to schedule everybody and actually do the interviews. Oh, we also developed a score sheet, where as we were interviewing them, we would score certain attributes 1 to 10, and at the bottom of the sheet, add them up. So it's kind of like a point system. So the ones with the most points were the ones that made it onto our short list.
Right.
Yeah. But no, it didn't take very long. Under 2 weeks.
Gotcha. Yeah. And it's such a good bang for your buck, right? To get a virtual assistant, given the amount of the cost versus the amount of additional help that you get.
Absolutely.
Free up some time is pretty powerful.
100%. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you jumping on here today, Jairo. Do you have any final words of wisdom? I mean, you've got 7,500 reviews, 10 years on Airbnb. Any words of wisdom to the audience here?
Oh man, I wish I did. I have words. I'm not necessarily sure that they have any wisdom in them. But I guess really understand what's working, right? I mean, for us, at least from a scaling perspective, the best advice that I can give you is to keep everything the same, or a lot of the things the same between listings. Like for example, the type of TVs that we use, all of the remotes are interchangeable. The mini splits that we install, they're all the same. But a lot of the things that are the same about our units, so that from an operational point of view, you can handle issues a lot more quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, getting the operations dialed in that is essential, right? To get to that skill. And I have to say, like, one thing that I was very impressed with was your operations, actually, like your ability to do like take those very last minute bookings and do like one night stays and turnovers, back to back turnovers. That's something that's also really important, right? Because in order to maximize the revenue, we don't want to have too many operational restrictions, right? There's a lot of operators who are like, oh, we can't really do too many back to back bookings because then we're getting issues with cleaners and or maybe we can't do last minute bookings, or all those operational restrictions also
Right.
limit the amount of revenue that we can generate, right? So I would say that's one thing that you guys have really dialed in is the operations, and that really supports the revenue management side.
Yeah.
So
Well,
good
thank
job
you
on
for
that.
that. Thank you for that compliment. And I think what's allowed us that flexibility is that we've kept a lot of those operations in house. So the cleaning staff, they work only for us. We wash all of our linen in a central location. So we're washing about 12,000 pounds of linen a month, but it all comes to a central location, gets washed, and it gets distributed back out. So being able to control that in house has given us that flexibility. I think it's when you start working with third parties that because of their restrictions, you now have to
Mm-hmm.
restrict on your
Yeah,
portfolio. Yeah.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for joining today. We've been talking for quite a while now. If people are going to visit Miami, like where should people go to stay at one of your units?
Yeah. So just www.staydelcarmen.com. You can also find us on Instagram with the same handle at staydelcarmen.
At Stay Del Carmen on Instagram, and then staydelcarmen.com is the website where you can see all 51 of Jairo's listings. So if you go to Miami, I highly recommend it. I just stayed with them over the weekend, and it was a very pleasant experience. So good job on that.
Thank you.
And yeah, and also if you are listening, if you need help with the revenue management, as Eric and I announced on the last podcast that we did, we now officially are open for applications for revenue management. So we can support you in 3 different ways. We have Cashflow Mastery course, which is to do it yourself. You learn it, and then you go ahead and implement everything. We have a consultancy side where I basically help you set everything up. We do like a weekly call, and then we also have the revenue management service where we just completely take over your revenue management, like we did with Jairo. And if you are interested in that, you can go to freewildfoundry.com/RPM. So RPM stands for Revenue and Pricing Management. That's the name of our service. So Freewild is FREEWYLD foundry.com/RPM. Right now, we're only taking on portfolios of at least $1 million. But yeah, if you're interested, if you have a portfolio that size, if you're slightly lower, then that's fine too. But yeah, reach out to us, and we'll be excited to talk to you and see if it's a good fit. So, with that said, thanks for listening. Hope this podcast was useful. And Jairo, good luck with your business. I know we'll talk to you every week. So, and I'm looking forward to coming back to Miami when it's a little bit less hot in the future.
Looking forward to seeing you here again soon, man. Thanks.
All right, Jairo, take it easy. And to the listeners, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.